Hey guys, it's Amy here, and today I bring you my September wrap-up. So we've got a lot of books to talk about today, so I'm just going to jump straight into it. So the first book I read in September was How I Live Now by Meg Rosoff. This follows the story of an American girl who was sent by her father over to England to live with her cousins and her aunt. During the first few chapters of the book, her aunt goes away abroad and leaves the children to kind of supervise themselves for a little while. Unfortunately, during the time that her aunt is away, a war breaks out, which means that she can't get back to England to look after the children. So the girl and her cousins are then left to fend for themselves, and it's all to do with the war and the friendships and kind of everything that happens. Just, it was so good. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The most was the fact that it was so raw and real, and when I was reading I actually believed that this could be like a true story of how things could happen if a war kind of just suddenly broke out like that. Elle and her cousins are all under the age of 16, they're all quite young, and a relationship that she builds with one of her male cousins in particular is really interesting and quite kind of interesting to read about, because she ends up falling in love with him basically, and there is a bit of incest going on, but it really makes you think about how children would cope in a situation like that if they're not being supervised and there's a war and all you're left with is a cousin who you've never really met before, you've moved to a new country. Like, why wouldn't you fall in love with them if they were there to protect you? Like, it was just really interesting to think about, and I found it to be an incredibly intriguing book. I read it all very, very quickly, and I would recommend it to everyone. The next book I read in September was Only Ever Yours by Louise O'Neill. I actually didn't enjoy this book. I initially gave the book 4 out of 5 stars, but I've actually put it down to 3 out of 5 stars now. I go back into it now because I actually did a full review of it, so I'll leave that link down below if you want to go and hear my thoughts on it. The next book I read this month was actually sent to me by Penguin Classics, and it is 7 Brief Lessons on Physics by Carlo Rovelli. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It is what it says in the title, 7 Brief Lessons on Physics basically, and there are little illustrations and things in here as well. I studied physics in high school, which was 6-7 years ago now, so I haven't done any kind of scientific anything since then, so some of this did go over my head a little bit because I just couldn't remember it from school. That's why I gave the book 4 out of 5 stars instead of 5 out of 5 stars, because some of it did just go over my head. I actually found the final chapter to be the most interesting, and it's the one where the author kind of applies physics to us and discusses how it could affect us in our lives and where we need to go from here and things like that. So it's kind of less about the physicsy bit and more about us as kind of people, and I found that really interesting. I'm not a massive reader of non-fiction, so I'm actually really glad that Penguin Classics sent this one to me, because I'm trying to delve a little bit more into non-fiction at the moment. So this one was a really good one to get me into it, as it was really, really short. The book I read this month was one that I finished. I had been reading for a month or so beforehand, and it was The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. This was a hefty book. I really, really enjoyed it. It's totally my kind of read, kind of Agatha Christie Poirot-esque. One of those books where there's a bit of a mystery and intrigue. This basically follows the story of the Moonstone, which is a jewel which is incredibly valuable, and it gets given to this certain lady and it gets stolen from her, and that's kind of what happens near the beginning of the novel, and it's all discussing, basically the whole thing is trying to work out where this moonstone's gone, and there are evil people trying to get it and all these other things. It's all just very exciting. I really enjoyed the way the book was written. It was split down into different parts, different people's accounts on the story and them telling us kind of their way through. I think I enjoyed the first character's point of view first, because I found him to be quite a hilarious character. He was quite naive and arrogant in the way that he felt he knew everything that was going on, and the way he spoke was just a bit pig-headed really. This book, a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I've actually purchased The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins as well, because I really want to read some more of his work. Next this month I read Landline by Rowell. This is another of her adult novels. I actually really, really enjoyed Attachments recently. It is still my favourite out of her novels. This was really good still, but not quite as good as Attachments. This basically follows the story of a married couple who are having a bit of trouble. The husband takes the children away for Christmas and leaves the wife to carry on with her work in the city. When the wife visits her family home, she goes into her old bedroom and picks up this old kind of vintage phone which she used to ring her boyfriend, now husband, on, and she starts ringing him from this phone and realises that she's not ringing her husband of the present, she's actually ringing her boyfriend from the past, and it's him when he was like 18 or 19 when they first met each other. Just a really interesting and quite funny concept. I found the book to be quite relatable, even though the characters were kind of older than me. I just found their relationship and the things, the troubles that they were going through to be quite, you know, relatable to someone in a relationship, a long-term relationship. But yeah, definitely, if you are a fan of Rainbow Rowell and you definitely like her adult stuff, I would recommend this one. Okay, so the next book I read was a graphic novel, and it was Deadly Class Volume 1. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. In fact, I'd be tempted to say that this is the most fun I've had reading a graphic novel all year, and I've read Saga this year. I really like this. It basically follows the story of a group of young people who are being trained to be assassins in a school. The protagonist is a young boy who is kind of adopted into the school at the beginning of the novel, and you see how he kind of tries to integrate within the friend groups of the school and all these different things, and he ends up murdering some people, and it's all quite intense. What I actually really enjoyed about this was that it was really quite gory, and there were lots of like drug taking and sex and just kind of intense stuff, and I really enjoyed that. I don't know why. I found the art style to be really up my street, and I just really enjoyed the whole thing, to be honest. I think it's a really well put together story, and I'm looking forward to reading the second volume. This book I read this month was Go Set a Watchman by Harper Lee. This is the book that was published recently after being discovered after a really long time of it being written. I think this is essentially one of the first drafts of To Kill a Mockingbird, not a book that she wrote after To Kill a Mockingbird. What do I have to say about this one? I had mixed feelings on it. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I didn't enjoy it anywhere near as much as I enjoyed To Kill a Mockingbird, but I did find it to be a really interesting read to kind of build up that kind of background to what the To Kill a Mockingbird was before it was what it was. The book follows Jean Louise, or Scout, as she is older. She's around 26, and she is visiting Maycomb and her father and her family and things like that, and the way she sees things and the way things are is a lot different to how they were when she was a child. She begins to see that this kind of godlike and rosy view of her father that she had is actually something that was very kind of skewed and just kind of set upon because she was a child, and that's the way she viewed her father. I thought it was interesting, and I really did like the interactions that Jean Louise had with other characters because I just like her. She's very sassy. The way she speaks to her aunt is just hilarious. But other than that, I just found it really lacking in something. I just didn't really invest myself in the story as much as I did with To Kill a Mockingbird. I think that's probably why this book was maybe not meant to be published, because To Kill a Mockingbird was so phenomenal. It was just amazing. I don't know, I'm really glad that I read this, and it hasn't kind of clouded my view of To Kill a Mockingbird or made it any less enjoyable. I know I will reread To Kill a Mockingbird again in the future and enjoy it just as much every single time. This definitely hasn't ruined it for me. I would recommend this to you if you have an interest in Harper Lee and the kind of origin of where To Kill a Mockingbird came from, but I wouldn't say it is amazing, and I wouldn't say that everyone should read it. If you want to read a good book, read To Kill a Mockingbird. So the penultimate book I read this month was The Walking Dead Volume 1. This is the comic book series that the TV show is adapted from. I actually read this on my iPad as the library that I borrow from had it available, and I was quite interested in reading it, but I didn't really want to pay out for it. The storyline was pretty exact to the TV show, to be honest, but I did kind of feel that I got so much more from the TV show, just because obviously you do, because they're showing you so much more. So I don't know. I don't think I'll carry on with the Walking Dead ones unless my library has them available to just borrow for free, because there's so many of them, and I don't honestly think that I would want to pay out for that many. I gave that one 4 out of 5 stars. And the final book that I read this month was Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. This book basically is based on Jeanette Winterson's childhood. It is her kind of story growing up, mixed in with fiction and kind of fairy tales and things like that. It is a really beautiful book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Jeanette was adopted when she was a baby. She's basically brought up in this extremely intense religious environment where kind of things like hell and sin and stuff is really pushed down your throat. Like, she kind of ended up going to school at one point, and the children there were kind of scared of her because she kept talking about how they were all going to go to hell and things. Overall, I found the story to be quite sad, but there was just a tinge of comedy in there because it was just a little bit funny. The way that her mother was getting her to behave and all the things that her mother believed was just quite ridiculous, some of the things. The crux of this whole story isn't the fact that she's religious, it's the fact that she grows up and discovers that she prefers women instead of men, and she's a lesbian. So discovering that and knowing that her feelings for other women were considered a sin and she would be going to hell and all these other things that she'd been brought up to believe. Some real turmoil there for her to work out how she was meant to behave and what she was meant to do and who she was meant to love, and just, it was just quite horrific. Like, I just couldn't even imagine being put in that kind of situation and knowing what to do, and just like knowing that if you acted on your heart's desires that you would be outcast by your family and friends and all the people that you've known your entire life. It's just quite sad and horrible to read about. Saying that though, I really enjoyed the book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It's actually the second book I've read from Jeanette Winterson, and I enjoyed this much more than the first one I read. So yes, those are all the books that I've read in September. Let me know down below what you've been reading, or if you've read any of these books and what you think. As always, I will leave links to Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, everything I've mentioned today down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and I will see you soon. Bye! Shelves on either side of me, and then moving up we have my main bookshelf.